I know that you're on a tight time frame, so we'll jump right in and get started. So commissioners, we're going to start off with a conversation about next steps to review the 4 recommendations from Housing Now related to zoning, and then we'll jump into our budget.
Yes. So does everybody know Kirk Eklund from Public Agency at WMCAT? So this is Mr. Eklund. He will give you a presentation, and this is the result of your conversation that you had while the mayor and I were at a conference and talking about the Housing Now recommendations and next steps. So I think that you'll find this to be very pleasing and very effective and in tune with what you want to do. So with that, Mr. Eklund.
Thanks so much. Good morning. I'm excited to be here and share some thoughts with you guys, and it's an honor to be able to step into this space and support you guys in that. So I'm used to doing a lot of more workshop presentation style, so I'm not always sure of how you guys do things in this space. So if I'm a little bit too interactive, you guys can just keep going. But these are my objectives for wanting to kind of share this out. Is I wanted to do a quick intro to the real basics of human-centered design, so that I'm not speaking too much lingo or buzzwordy things. Talk a little bit about our philosophy of community listening with public agency, and then share out the roadmap for engagement of what it is that we think maybe is what you're looking for, and see if we can move that forward. And then what we like to call a pre-mortem, followed by question and answers. And I know you guys will have some thoughts, questions, and conversations, so I want to save some time for that at the end. I'm also from the Boston area, so I talk pretty quick. So hopefully that helps in getting through this space to get to the discussion part at the end. So this is from our website. Essentially, human-centered design, also called design thinking, a problem-solving process with roots in the design field. It's been used to help people understand complex problems, and we've helped work with Domino's and Google and things like that, and some of the work we've done with Expedia and all over. But we're really interested in how does that work in affecting change in the community. We think it's capable of community transformation, and that's why we do what we do at Public Agency at WMCAT. So the 5 steps of design thinking: empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. But really the thing that we like to focus on is the empathy mode of design thinking. But it's not just the first step, it really is the mindset that undergirds the entire thing. And that's the way that we focus on all of our engagements and the workshops and trainings we do, is having empathy as the core behind that. I woke up this morning and immediately thought of getting dressed, which I guess that's a fairly normal thing. But I was like, oh man, that's exactly why the human-centered design process is different than kind of the way we've solved problems in the past, in that there's a tendency to want to be like, oh, it's a sunny day. This is West Michigan, so I'm not going to wear a jacket. I'm going to jump outside, but not really taking into consideration the temperature or the forecast for the day. But with human-centered design, really wanting to look at the thermometer as opposed to setting the thermostat and saying, hey, we know the solution and we're going to go and create it. Instead saying, hey, I want to look at the thermometer. I want to understand the context and the setting so that the things that we create are in response to the actual felt needs, the reality that is being experienced in the community. And so that's the contrast a little bit of we want to be a thermometer and participate in understanding the context, not set our own. We know what the solutions are, so we're going to jump right in. That's kind of what sets that apart. So our philosophy of community listening starts off with what we do here in town, Public Agency. We've done work with Grand Valley, the Community Foundation, GRPS, HQ, Steelcase, doing a lot of different workshops and trainings and trying to understand how do we best step into empathy and equity in the spaces that we find ourselves in. But we've really been intentional about pulling together this hyper-local grassroots group that we call the Community Catalysts. Commissioner Rapart referenced that in the Committee of the Whole last week. And it's a group of diverse, highly skilled experts that have really, I think we could credit any of the successes we've had at Public Agency has been because of their support through their expertise, perspective, and the skills that they bring to the table. And so all of the work we do goes through that lens of connecting with that. And then we have a national and statewide network of practitioners who do similar work. We're connected to the National Equity Project out of Oakland. We do work with the design school at Stanford. There's a design firm in Nashville, and then I actually reached out to and have been connecting with a couple in New York City, both the Center for Urban Pedagogy and the Hester Street Collaborative. Both do really similar work to engaging the community to better understand how to engage with community planning or zoning ordinances, really lined up with what we're trying to do here. And so I've begun some conversations with them in New York to help guide this process as well, which I'm excited about. So this is our roadmap for engagement with some flags marking the way. The earlier work that had already been done was with some of the Housing Now and the 4 amendments that came forward, and then the community feedback that came from that, from neighborhood associations and community members who had thoughts and concerns to share. And so that has already all happened. And so our plan moving forward is to do a series of human-centered design engagements with the community, both the neighborhood, or not both, but neighborhood associations, nonprofit developers, community members, to best understand, similar to the thermometer thing, what is the current climate, what are the things that were experienced, both pain points and positives that have happened currently with the Housing Now experience, and how do we design community engagement based on what we learned from that. And so through the month of May, the next few weeks, being really intentional about engaging different stakeholders and perspectives to understand how do we create the experiences that would allow us to best get an understanding of where the community is at with their response to the 4 amendments. So the reason that this is different than perhaps before are other ways of going about it would be is we don't have the perfect finalized agenda of what those meetings will look like. We have a hypothesis and some assumptions, and actually at your spots, you have some printouts of kind of the proposed framework for how we would engage that. But the reality is we don't yet know all of the details of how to best engage the community in that space. So we're really excited about the next few weeks to be able to engage and understand what is, so that we can create and design the engagements, whether they are 4 engagements that each go over Amendment 3, then 6, then 8, and then 9, or if we combine them based on like similarities that would potentially be able to streamline some of that, or if it's a big one that has all of them together. There are a lot of options on the table, and you guys mentioned some of them at your Committee of the Whole meeting and talked about some of the pros and cons. And so we've done some work initially to put together a general proposal, which you'll find titled Initial Prototype Agenda for Community Engagement on the back of that sheet. So in general, that's the roadmap for engagement, which we'll open up for in a moment for that. Just checking on the time to make sure that there's time for this. This is an interactive part. We like to do what we call pre-mortems. This is the Housing Now ship, maybe the HMS Housing Now, if we want to call it that. A lot of times after projects, we have debriefs or post-mortems and say, hey, what went well, what didn't go well, why did this outcome happen? We're really intentional about doing that beforehand and asking the question of, if in 90 days or 120 days from now, if it sank, what happened and why? And so if you would humor me and take a moment, I'll give you like a minute or two to write down and scribble out what would be a couple things that if we did them, it would not be a successful experience. And then we'll do a share out, and we'll be able to help use that as kind of a backdoor way of getting to what are the priorities and the focal points that we want to make sure we don't miss.
If we don't make some changes, we're going to have status quo.
So we'll take just a minute to write it out, because people might not be as quick as not everybody's as quick as thinking as you. So we'll just take a quick moment.
So the specific question for all of us to answer.
What could be causes that this wouldn't be successful?
Okay.
If this new engagement for the Housing Now isn't successful, what could have caused that lack of success? All right, maybe 30 more seconds. All right, so if you wouldn't mind sharing out some of the different things, and then I'll take notes, and we'll move on from there.
All right. I'll start. We'll just go around the table. So I put down, it won't be successful if people don't feel respected and heard. Commissioner?
I think that if we limit engagement to 90 days when participants want more time or on some or all of the amendments, it wouldn't be successful.
Thanks.
I think it won't be successful unless everybody involved in the process is a little bit uncomfortable. Everybody.
Thanks.
Including you, Kirk, including you.
Especially you.
Especially you.
Look at Commissioner.
Anybody feel excluded from that?
I think that the ship will sink if we don't come to a decision.
Yeah, thanks. Commissioner Jones?
Oh, I think if there's a lack of context regarding zoning and planning, and those who are there not at least having a baseline understanding of what zoning and planning is and how it pertains, obviously, to those 4 elements.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think it won't be successful if those participating don't come to the realization that some change is needed in order to facilitate more affordable housing in our community.
Thanks.
And then, so I have more than one, is that okay?
Yeah, I do too.
Okay.
There's no real rules.
Okay, good. If the neighborhood voice is missing from final recommendations, and then the other 2 I'll combine, if the people involved in giving input don't make up the city's demographics, and if non-city residents are the decision makers.
Yep.
Thanks. That's helpful. And so you can imagine that that's a way that we then plan out priorities and make sure that the things that we design are meeting the expectations that you have of what this would look like. And so that's kind of the breeze through version of that. And I realize that I likely left out some gaps in that, but I want to open up to if you have thoughts, concerns, feedback that you would want to push on to make sure that I understand that or as we move this forward. So the floor is
Okay.
open.
Since you asked.
Yeah, of course.
I have a second one too. I think if there are residents within the 500 feet that aren't informed,
So the people impacted by the ordinances or
Exactly.
the amendments, if they aren't,
yeah.
Commissioner?
But I think it's a little bit bigger than that, Commissioner. That it's, I think the 500-foot thing is arbitrary. I think it needs to be a bigger conversation about, I think that number, whether it was 100 or 500 or 1,500, was an arbitrary data point that really wasn't a data point. It was just a number that happened. So like, if we're really going to talk about changing the context of affordable housing within our community, then we really need to talk about how the land use it's a bigger thing than just within 500 foot of a business corridor. And so how, if we're really going to talk about putting more affordable housing, we have to look at it in a bigger community context than just those that are directly impacted within.
I
X
fully agree, but I do
number of
think
feet
too
of-
that that's out there, so people need to
Right.
be informed.
Commissioner?
This goes without saying because it's been already said a couple times, but I just want to just overemphasize it, I guess, is that the option of doing nothing, like leaving everything the way it is, has to be off the table. There has to be some change because what's happening right now is not working.
Thanks.
So, from your perspective, then, as a facilitator, but not someone versed in land use, like what does success look like for you as a facilitator? For when we get to the end and you've done this engagement, and what do I walk away and feel like, all right, that was worth it? Tell me how that plays out.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I will say I know more about zoning than I ever thought I would have after having prepped for these series of meetings, but still definitely nowhere near an expert in land use. I think that the reason that, from my understanding of watching the committee on the whole, and the reason that you reached out to public agency was really a desire to prioritize community engagement through an equitable lens and asking the question of how do we make sure that in the way that we approach the community, we're doing it in a way that is respectful and honoring of the participants and engaging the people who may not otherwise be engaged. And I know that that's the heart behind a lot of the work that the city does. And so I think that's why we were asked to come on as a partner. And so at the end of this, I don't think our goal is to convince people and say, hey, this is how you need to feel, but it's to be able to make sure that people have an opportunity to share their perspective from an informed place, that if they need some level of education or some kind of broad overview of it so that they can step in and say, oh, that makes sense, this is why I'm in support of it, or this is why I'm not, so that when we report back out to the commissioners, we're able to say, these are the things that we heard, this amount of people are in support, here are some of the reservations, and be able to give an accurate reading on that, if that makes sense. So for us, success would be a true honoring engagement and feedback from community.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
What I would hope for, and what I would be looking for as well, is a commitment from your organization to, and all involved with the process, to the best of your ability, gaining a better understanding or trying to secure a historical context around issues regarding zoning and planning in marginalized communities.
Yeah.
I think it would add quite a bit to the process, your ability to, and those involved, the ability to be able to see things through that lens and understand again why it's critically important to gain voice. And again, when you look at it through historical lens, understanding, how this has not worked out well for folks who have been historically marginalized.
Yeah.
And so because I think that what's out there is the real legitimate concern that here we go again. This is gonna, these things we're gonna get screwed.
Right.
And so I think that would probably add some level of comfort and assurance if your team is versed on why people would feel that way.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think in some ways it feels like that this movement is an attempt to redeem zoning, because zoning has been used as a tool to divide and oppress and marginalize.
Correct.
And so how can the city, and I think this is the question you were already asking, is how can the city use zoning to support affordable housing and to support like an equitable space for all of our residents? And that's why I'm excited for us to be able to participate and support that, is because it's like the beauty of redemption of a tool that's been used negatively to now be used as opportunity for equity.
Correct.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Commissioner Lanier?
Yeah, I lost my train of thought because Commissioner Jones always goes so deep.
Why we like you around this table.
Right, we do, yes. So to kind of go back to the question about the ship sinking, I think another element, Housing Now actually was a different phase of the housing discussion, and the Great Housing Strategies was the beginning of that, at least since I've been a commissioner. And when we started that work, and I think it was transferred over to Housing Now as well, the goal really was about affordable housing. And somehow conversations have morphed into all housing. And I think that it's important that as we're having kind of the final conversation about these particular recommendations, that we don't forget that this is about affordable housing. Now, maybe my colleagues would disagree with that, but that's my interpretation of what we've been working on. And so even some of the recommendations and the end result should impact affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is helpful, thank you. And I've had some really helpful meetings with the city planning department and with the interim city manager, Mr. DeLong, in regards to, we have these 4 in front of us that we want to see movement on, and then it's not saying, let's talk about the entire housing situation, but let's have tangible movement on some proposals that are already on the table that we can actually work with and respond to. And if I'm reading you correctly, like that's part of your thought, is like we're specifically talking about these ones, and we want to be able to respond to them and hopefully move them forward as an opportunity for affordable housing.
And within the context of affordability.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I could add to that just a little bit. So this is also, we want to answer those questions about those 4 items, because that's the task before us kind of right now. But what long-term, we're about to embark on a master planning process. And so I think we'll learn things in these meetings that will inform that process. And so Kirk has been very intentional about helping design kind of this off-ramp for ideas where we pick up stuff that we need to know for the next thing we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And so it can be rich for the 4 items that we have before us, but it also can provide richness for future discussions.
Sure. As long as affordability.
Yep.
Yeah. Commissioner Park, did you have a question? No?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right.
So not about this in particular, but just to kind of remind us about our discussion last week or a couple weeks ago, we talked about making sure that we were all on the same page and giving direction. So this is that time.
This is
Yes.
that time.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that, this was a great presentation and interaction, but that this is your opportunity to weigh in to make sure that Kirk and his team has what it is that we're expecting from this work.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Talked about kind of
Yeah.
waiting and thinking through those things and bringing it back when we had a chance to talk.
Thank you. I mean, I feel good about this process, and I'm very hopeful. But my question, and I'll open up to Commissioner Sue to weigh in on this. Have we thought about dates and locations and times? I mean, our schedules
Yeah.
fill up quick. I think I'm scheduling out already to August, and so have we thought about that?
Yeah, and
Especially the location piece, which I know Commissioner Lanier brought up.
we had, I think I have a Commissioner Lanier quote in my thing here, referencing to meet where people
Smart
already are, something like that.
Yeah.
And so we don't have specifically the locations picked out. Part of what we're doing over the next few weeks in May is to understand what makes sense in that space. If it would be helpful for the commissioners on this side to predetermine some of the locations and then through the engagements then design what the actual engagement looks like, absolutely open to that. I'm not prepared to have the specific dates and times, but I can, if there's a timeline of please let us know by this date, we can have those sorts of details to you by then.
Well, my thought is twofold. One, I know many of us around this table would like to attend. And then secondly, we've talked in the past about making sure the community has enough time in advance
Yeah,
to be
absolutely.
able to attend if they're interested. And I think sometimes in the past, we haven't gotten the word out far enough in advance, and people don't hear about it until after the fact. So I think we need to be really mindful of that to make sure people have ample time to plan to attend.
Thanks, that's helpful. Yeah.
And then there was conversation about progressively having the discussion. I think Commissioner
Yeah, so
Lockhart,
that's
that
the
was
only
your-
thing in here that the sessions with repeated content, I want to make sure that they're building on each other, that we're moving from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. So maybe some could have repeated content, but I think that it's going to be tricky because there's 4 proposals. So I also am realistic about that, but.
I think by repeated content, so there are 4 proposals, you might have 2 sessions on number 3.
Yeah.
So people had a chance to get to their make sure they could cover all of them if they wanted to, because what we don't want to do is turn this into like it was in college and summer school,
Right.
where you were in college in your class every night.
Yeah.
Doing your zoning work.
Right.
And so, we want to try to find a way to do this in a way where it's accessible and people can get to everything they want, and we get the information that we need. But it also works well into a human schedule.
Yeah. We've had a few conversations going back and forth around that, wanting to make sure, as we consider the equitable lens, the more we spread out the options, the more difficult it would be for someone who might not have ease of access to getting to one if they say, well, now I have to show up to 4, spread out over different times. So that's something that we're really wrestling with. As we watch the committee on the whole, realizing that there is that also desire to make sure things are moving forward, and it is a ton of content to try to pack into 1 or 2 nights. So part of the plan is to have a couple prototype ways of taking it through. Like, we're not just going to jump in and say, here's the best way to do it, but making sure to set apart some of that time to figure out how can the community best engage as we continue to have an eye towards movement forward.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's just important, given the interrelatedness of these various proposals, that some rely on the other, that it's, you taking them in a silo to tackle one without understanding the nuance and the context of how it interrelates to another is important. And so having the practitioners available to be able to help bring that context to the conversation is important. And I think to Commissioner Lanier's point about affordability as the focus, but again, being able to effectively communicate that given some of the constraints by state and federal law, that we have to do certain things to set a base work or a framework of housing that that can then reach the end goal of affordability, even if it's not affordability is explicitly stated.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to go to Commissioner Kelly, then Commissioner Lanier, and I know you have a time frame. I think what we're hoping today is to give you the green light to move forward. You can flesh out those details and,
Yep.
and bring them back, or share them, and we can work with you as the process moves forward.
Wonderful.
Okay, but
Yeah.
let me go to Commissioner Kelly and then Commissioner Lanier.
I just had a question because I didn't see this in here, although I do see you have visuals to engage multiple learning styles, which is great. Is there also going to be any kind of note-taking or minutes so that people can refresh and reread and
Yep, I've
clarify
actually
at the
had
next meeting?
conversation with Becky Jo as part of potentially having ways to have this connect with the Bloomberg opportunity.
Oh, good.
And that part of their requirements are to have copious notes throughout, so we're in conversation to make sure that that is taken care of.
Great.
And we're gonna try to make it visual as well. So you can see the difference of, here's what this looks like, here's what that looks like.
Great. Commissioner Lanier?
So I'm curious to know, Kurt, if our 90-day request, I think, you know, if you've watched the video from last time, that was a part of that. Is that restrictive for you? And so going back to Commissioner Rephardt's request of a progressive meeting strategy so that you can spend more time, are you unable to do that because we want this done so quickly? Because I want the best result, and if 90 days doesn't get us that, I'd rather modify that request of 90 days to get us the best result for the public, and you're the expert, so I'm kind of looking for feedback from you about this restriction of getting this done in 90 days because we won't want to delay any further.
Yeah, constraints in some ways are like the lifeblood of design, like it's what helps make it move forward in some ways. I'm not going to pretend that the 90 days, I was like, oh, so easy. Like, it is a constraint that will be difficult. And I think maybe the tension that it's fighting with in some ways is that equitable lens. I would feel 100% confident that we could do something and make something happen, but with that strong focus on making sure that we're engaging marginalized populations, that those who are directly impacted, and as Mayor Bliss referenced, it can easily be a tendency to host things without giving an adequate time for people to plan around. As I mentioned in here, by the end of May, we feel like we'll have a really strong idea of what it is we're going to do. And at that point, we might say, hey, the 90 might actually have to be like, the 90 to 120 might be 140, and seeing if that's something that is copacetic with the commissioners and the team. We still want to work towards making it happen as quickly as possible, because it does matter, and affordable housing is an issue today. And so we don't want this to be something that's takes too long. So it is kind of holding both of those things in tension. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so the end of May, we'll have a better understanding.
Absolutely.
Thank
Yep.
you, I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think too, we all know that there's a lot of people engaged, and we want to keep them engaged.
Yeah.
And I think one of in hindsight, as I kind of processed myself, what, personally I could have done better this past year and a half to get us into a better place. I think because we have been talking about this for so long. I mean, the first housing strategy meeting that I went to out at Calvin was almost 3.5 years ago.
Right.
And so I do think that there's a danger when you spread things out, that you have people engaged 3.5 years ago who were not engaged over the last 8 months, and they feel like they haven't been involved because that timeline was so long. So I do think that there is this challenge, this pull to be mindful of process, provide enough time, adequate time, but also to have an urgency to it, to make sure that it's brief enough where people are able to stay engaged throughout the entire process.
Yeah, I agree.
And I trust your wisdom to help us figure that out.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Mayor, this is a problem that every city in the nation is struggling with, so this timeline is not unusual. I think we just have to do the best we can with both of those tensions. But I do also want to mention that what a lot of the public feedback we got was that some of this might not finish, and it will go to the master planning process. So we don't know the outcomes yet. This is a process, and it's a complicated one of those big, hairy problems that sometimes come in a
I call
second.
them a wicked problem.
Yes.
Wicked problem to solve. So, All right, Kirk, well, thank you so much. I know you have to scoot out. Appreciate you coming today. Sorry again for our tardiness. And please, you have a great team to work with Becky Jo and Alex and Zach. And, we're really happy that this actually is aligned with and integrated into our work with the Mayor's Challenge. So we're glad that we can learn together.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right,
So we'll bring the contract back with public agency on May 1.
great. Sounds good. So that'll be next week.
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, Commissioners, so we are going to take a brief 10-minute break, grab some lunch, use the restroom, and then we will meet back in here for our first budget session.
In how many minutes?
10?
10, 15? Okay, I'm sorry, 15. All right, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. Commissioner Jones is around here somewhere, but I say let's go ahead and kick this off.
All right. Okay, as this is our first budget review, I'll do an overview. We'll have Jeff come in and do a financial over the primary funds that we'll look at today. So we talked about results a little bit this morning, and we have really good operating results. You have been good stewards, again, I'll say, of our resources and of this community. You produced net operating earnings in the last 2 years. It looks like fiscal 19 community and police relations has been important. Also, housing, we've done engagement around parks, and we've done engagement around specific projects and other things as well. So we've had a very busy year and a very good year, and we've also begun working more actively and more openly on race and equity and elimination of disparities, which I think is important work for us to be involved in. So the commission worked to set priorities. Those priorities have formed this budget, this fiscal plan that I'm presenting to you today. These were your top 8 ranked priorities, and are important things for us to be working on. So this budget reflects that. You also we did an exercise about more of or less of, and it's what I really liked about the process that we used is that there was no dissonance between your priorities and your more of, less of. Everything was totally in alignment. So communication was your top priority, and what did you want less of? Reactive communication. What did you want more of? Strategic communication. So it worked out really well. And so your priorities are instructive, but so is the more of, less of. So one of the things that you'll see in my letter to you is about working to find ways to do code compliance services in a different way. Because the outcome we want is high quality neighborhoods, good quality of our life in our neighborhoods. And enforcement is sometimes a result of that activity. So if we can get more compliance and have less opportunities or less need to enforce, I think that would be a good outcome. So those are the kinds of things we want to work on as we go through this year. So you also had capital priorities, and you did a good job of prioritizing those. We had a really good discussion about equitable investment, and so in the capital review process that we do later this month, we'll show balance and distribution again, the part that you saw for the past, but we'll also look at balance and distribution of capital investment for the recommended for this fiscal year. And also in the budget this year, we'll talk about specific investments in the third ward. So we're doing a lot of planning for area-specific plans on Southtown and South Division. And so there are dollars in the capital plan to support projects that are actually vital street projects that will have elements of street furniture and other things that perhaps the capital improvement fund can help augment and do. Also, you see the picture of the lodge there. That was during the last year's mayor's greening initiative planning. And that was when I kind of fell in love with Martin Luther King Jr. Park Lodge, and saw because I don't really only kind of seen it from the pool side. I hadn't seen the park side, and for whatever reason. So it's a really cool building. And in the fiscal plan this year in the capital reserve fund is our dollars for doing some programming for what that space could be in conjunction with the community to see if we can invest, how we could invest in that on a going forward basis. And then your other priorities are there as well. Street lighting we'll talk about separately. River restoration, there's an allocation for that. We have more tree maintenance going on, and that'll be in the operating budget. We'll be doing transit shelters, and there's an allocation in the future for Calder Plaza as well. So in the 5-year planning horizon, we were able to get, I would say, all of your capital priorities within the 5-year planning horizon in some measure. A key part of what we worked on this year was deciding to continue the process of transformation. And so we've had 3 phases of transformation. The phase 1 is I credit with essentially saving our city, the work that staff and commission and the community did together there. Phase 2 was about sustainable asset management. Phase 3 was about beginning to be more outward facing. And really phase 4 is for you to put your stamp on. And so we've gone through a process with you, and you have given us good feedback. We'll present what we think is a draft today, and then we will look at that in more detail later in our review, budget review, so later in the month of May. So we talked a little bit about this already earlier today at Committee of the Whole, but we show the operating results that I talked about. So 18 is good, fiscal 17 and 18 are both good. Fiscal 19 shows continued net positive earnings, and we have to be careful after that because of the impact of deficits on our budget. And so that's what the transformation fund will help, or the transformation plan will help us do. So here's the graphic representation of that. You can see in fiscal 19 about $300,000 net positive earnings. That will get a little bit better because, as we mentioned earlier today again, the district court came in with a budget adjustment that I really appreciate. That actually will increase our net earnings, reduce our expenditures, increase our net earnings in fiscal 19, and also affect the out years a little bit as well. So things are a little bit better because of that, but we still have work to do in the out years. So let's talk now about how we're investing in City Commission priorities. So the first priority, your highest priority, and I've told staff a joke, and maybe you'll think it's funny too, but maybe you won't. Well, I'm not very sure of my material, you know. So, 8 out of 7 of you, 8 out of 7 of you voted for communications.
There were 8 at the time.
There were 8 at the time. Right now there's 7. So
Yeah, 8, yeah. Yes.
you have to think about it.
Our prior commission and current commission
Yeah.
made this a priority.
Yeah. So that's why it's number 1. And see, there's a punchline. So anyway, so and what we've done is over the year we did the audit by Truscott-Rossman. The audit turned into some recommendations, which also then became a strategic plan. And so this fiscal plan recommendation includes implementation of that plan. And so this is the structure that was in the strategic plan report. This is the structure that I've recommended implementing. And we have, of the pulling this office together, I have put it in the executive office rather than have it be a department. I think that it's a executive function, and I want to keep it close to you and to the manager, to the mayor, so it's close. We've done this without adding, done it largely with either reassigning staff from different places here or position substitutions. So but there are 2 new positions that are budgeted, and the way that works is the manager puts them in the budget with the recommended kind of pay range, and then they go to civil service. Civil service figures out what to do with that recommendation. And so the office is fully constructed and fully funded, and we have more process to do if we approve the budget, but it's there in that shape. And also, if you like, we can schedule extra time to talk about this later in our budget review. So the next priority is Housing Now. So we spent much of the morning before this session talking about Housing Now. We've really made good progress. So 6 of the 11 things are recommendations are implemented. We're working now on the 4 zoning ordinance recommendations, and I believe that we'll have those wrapped up this summer. And it's made a difference. What's really interesting in this budget is that for the first time we'll be able to make the payment to the Housing Now fund, the Affordable Housing Fund, that we envisioned when we created that process. And so we're estimating that $740,000 will be the payment this year, and that represents the 20% of the fund balance, net earnings that we've earned in fiscal 18 that could then be paid to the Affordable Housing Fund. And so that will be on top of the other sources we're using to seed the fund, and will provide the new Affordable Housing Fund corpus to begin investing with. So, community and police relations, we have made significant progress here as well. City Commission appropriated the $1 million for fiscal 18, and we've invested a portion of that for the Police Policies and Procedures Review Committee. We've also invested in training and have invested in, well, mainly training in the Police Policies and Procedures Review Task Force. So we have dollars available for not only for this fiscal year, but also future fiscal years for investments that we might make that we have consensus on that will produce results having to do with community and police relations. So part of what we have done through the year, Commissioner Jones, I believe, had the idea of having the listening sessions, and they were good. We learned a lot. We ended up getting 300 questions from people who attended the sessions that we answered. And we also, I think they were the first kind of stage in a new form of listening where staff was there but didn't engage. You know, we learned and we took back something. And so this graphic meant something to me because it does show the cycle of the community and the police and how it's an interactive relationship. It needs to work together, and the questions show the questions that we have to answer and how we have to continue working on this. So the interaction of this kind of listening and then the work that the Police Policies and Procedures Review Task Force is doing, I think will lead to a consensus about investments that we can make to help improve community and police relationships and improve quality of life in our neighborhoods. So that process is ongoing right now. It may come back while we're doing budget review. We may have a recommendation from the task force, or it may come slightly after we're done with budget review. But the good news is the dollars are there, and they're there for the next 4 fiscal years. We've also made really good progress on our 12-point plan, and we are almost all done. So if you look at the list, you can see what we've done and when we've done it. And the remaining item that we have to do is to look at a disparity in arrests. And we'll do that as part of it's either as part of or following the Police Policy and Procedure Review Task Force. So we're, I think, making very good progress on our commitments. So continuing to work on OPEB. Mr. Dode will join me from the back and talk about our status and where we are with our OPEB and retirement liability. Jeff?
So I did a couple quick slides here. This one shows the OPEB funding history by value. So you can see our total accrued liabilities is the blue line there. Still a big number. Our unfunded amount is just over 100 million, so still a significant number, but the orange line is kind of one I want to call attention to. You can see we started with $0 saved up, and now I know this says just over 50 million, but as of the year-end report, we have over 60 million in assets in 3 different trusts to help pay for this benefit. And then this one is our funding history by percent, and you can see police and fire are a little higher funded, and general's lower, but these are all according to the actuarial guidelines. We contribute the not only the normal cost, but the unfunded liability as well each year. So.
Jeff, can you give us a number then? So we're only 36% funded.
Yeah, correct.
And like what, 15 for general? What's the number of that for unfunded liability?
But just about 100 million.
100 million total for general and
Total for all 3, correct. Yep.
And where did we start, Jeff?
We started, you can see about 230 million was our peak. So this one, the gray line here is our total OPEB unfunded actuarial accrued liability. You can see it's just around the $100 million mark.
Is there a horizon for, I mean, they're obviously narrowing?
Well, it is, we have about 59% of our workforce now is in the defined contribution retiree healthcare plan, so it's shifting as new people come on. So this is a horizon, unlike the police and fire pension plan, which goes on in perpetuity. This one does have an end date. It's a long time out, but we continue to build those assets.
And It only goes up to age 65, right? And then you have to
Some,
go
yes,
into Medicare.
or the age of Medicare, yeah.
So that's a really good point there, because many retiree healthcare plans, they will go like end of life. And so that, which is a much longer horizon. Ours goes from really retirement to age 65, so it's capped, it's defined, and that helps quite a bit.
And here's our two pension plans. You all know the general pension is closed. You can see the unfunded, the blue line on here is right around $100 million also for the general plan. And you can see assets of about $400 million. And then police and fire are very similar. So roughly just under $300 million total for OPEB and both pension plans of unfunded liability still. Police and fire did make annually now they're going to renew or look at the rate of return assumptions, and they did decide to lower it again for December 31 of last year for the police and fire pension from 7.25 to 7.15%. So we're waiting on that actuary right now to see what that impact that's going to have on the budget. I estimated it at about $500,000, which is built into this plan already, so I'm thinking we're going to be fine with this budget, or we should have that report in a couple weeks.
And remind me again what percent we're funded. Is it, what, 82% funded right now?
Yeah, I think general's around 80 and police fire I think right around 82, correct.
Any more questions about OPEB?
Commissioners? All right.
Well, so, well, the point is, we're funding it responsibly. We're managing it. We've closed our retiree healthcare system, and we've closed our general retirement system. So we've made the changes we need to make to be sustainable, and we're funding it on the annual required basis. So those are talking points that I think I got right. So another commission priority was certainty in the development environment. And so here what we're trying to do is we're working on two levels. One is with our residents, and also with our investors and developers. And so at the development center, we're experimenting with something called the customer ombudsman. And so that's a person that right now is a temporary person that is the person who can answer questions, run down things, answer the kind of questions that might come up, help unstick something if something is stuck, and do the kinds of things that an ombudsman would do. We also have expanded our online offerings. I think, if I remember correctly, I think we're at like 60 or 70% of all our plans are now coming in electronically, and we're also doing more like electronic plan filing as well. And we're beginning to work on standard work for inspectors. So these are the kinds of things that we want to emphasize. Here is how we do things, and so we're working on that. Engagement is critical, and so have worked, and we'll mention this later, with the Urban Core Collective about the type of engagement, and we're piloting engagement, even as we talked about today at the beginning of this session, new ways of figuring out what people want to know and having them tell us what we need to know. In planning, we're doing area-specific plans in Southtown, and we're also doing one on South Division, and of course we've completed the Granville area-specific plan. So that will kind of create the constellation, or complete the constellation of area-specific plans, and set a really solid base for moving into the master plan process, which we have dollars in a small amount of dollars in the budget for this year to initiate the process. And that's something that we'll talk about. The master plan is something we'll talk about in more detail later in the budget review cycle. So we've done work with the Urban Core Collective, as I mentioned. This is Becca Velazquez from the Urban Core Connection, and they are a collective, and here we're working at the Neighborhood Summit. And so we did 2 sessions there. One was in the morning at Development 101, so anybody, or Zoning 101, so people could go to that, and it was a prerequisite for the afternoon session. And in the afternoon session, you can see Becca there and Sergio and others talked about, okay, based on based on what you learned in the morning, here is how we think we can do a better job of interacting and connecting. And the results there were positive, and so now we're working with them to figure out how we can start to roll that out. So we talked about planning already, and these are plans that are either complete in terms of the Granville plan or are in the process of being complete, which are the Southtown and the South Division plan. And then the master plan is one that we'll invest in as well. Another city commission priority was to invest in an economic development strategy. So we have been, I think, remarkably successful in growing our economy. And we have tools that we know how to work well and that do work well. And we have public-private partnerships that work well also. The strategy, though, is about continuing to do that, but also then looking through an equity lens and figuring out, okay, how do we use these tools throughout our entire city to help improve economic development everywhere. So I think it was Commissioner Lanier that asked me like 2 years ago, Eric, what's the biggest economic development project we could work on? And I said 49507, would be a great economic development project. So, and it's really about working to eliminate or reduce disparities. And the more we can do that in our community, the better off we're all going to be. So,
Eric, can I ask a question about that? And maybe a few things are running together for me. For some reason, I thought earlier this year, even last year, we talked about economic development already looking at how to embed equity into their work.
Yep,
and I
they
thought
are.
that they were already working on that.
Yep.
Shouldn't a lot of that work be done, and is that separate and distinct? My understanding is that separate and distinct from having an economic development strategy.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
So the work that we'll be bringing those forward to economic development project team soon. So they've made significant progress and are ready to. They've already implemented some, and so
Okay.
they'll be doing more. And that's really how do you tune up the tools to have an equity lens. And then the next thing is how do you deploy the tools on a broader scale to create the outcomes.
Okay. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. It came up even recently at our Brownfield meeting. And I think some of those conversations can't wait until we have this larger economic development vision and strategy done.
Yep.
So,
Yes, and you're right. Okay, so acting intentionally to reduce disparities, that was one of the priorities that came out. And so we have kind of both internal and external strategies that we need to deploy. Do you have a question there?
no,
Okay.
sorry, I have
So-
allergies.
No difference. So, yeah. So I have allergies too, and I'm needing Kleenex. So, what we're working on here is trying to answer questions through our budget process, and we'll talk more about that later today, where we use the racial equity tool within our departments to come up with some really novel ways of improving racial equity and eliminating disparities within their work. And also there's the community impact, and this was a graphic that was in the Southtown planning PowerPoint that I really liked. And because really what it's about is the word together. That's an important word here. And also the most important word that's in the middle of the diagram is trust. And if we can figure those two things out, we'll do very, very well. And that's what this work is about. So so what I'm envisioning is a kind of a both-and strategy as we do this. So we want to continue doing the things that have made us successful, and we want to take those successful tools and translate them into other work as well. And so, all economic development is important. We just want to make sure that we're intentional as well. So community engagement, part of what we're doing with this priority is folding the community engagement piece that currently is in planning into the Office of Communications. And what we think that will do is connect them with our communications strategy number one, but also help us to expand the role of that communication or the engagement section and be more proactive and be able to deliver better engagement on a broader scale.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, I have a question about that, and it really ties to pretty much everything you've already been talking about, Eric, in this budget preview. And that is, as we do community engagement, one of the things that I've heard repeatedly around this table, I think Commissioner Lanier even mentioned it this morning, or WMCAT did in response to her concerns, that we don't expect people to come here, but we go out to the community. And as we look at doing community engagement in the planning department, I think there are a couple things that we have to be mindful of, and that is who's doing it. I know there's a new position open, so that those persons reflect the community. And then also that we might be able to take the planning department out into the community as a more neutral party prior to a conversation, say, with a developer, so that questions can get answered.
Yep.
And by our planning staff and with somebody who can manage the community engagement. And then out of that, maybe some early decisions can come to lead us in the direction whether it needs to go to the Planning Commission or whether there's support for something, and to sort of frame those questions that then might be asked when they do meet with the developer. So again, I think just looking at how we can go out into those areas, and that way we're educating, we're informing, we're answering questions, and there is that more neutral party initially just to help people understand the planning and zoning essentials and what kind of.
That you just described the essentials of the Urban Core Collective discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about understanding the rules of the law,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also about understanding the neighborhood and how people and what people need. And so and there's an interaction between those two things. And so to be effective as a citizen planner, you need to kind of know what the rules are. And for planning to be effective, you got to know what the people think and want and need. And so that's essentially, you described the essence of what this should be. So, thank you. On this slide, we've done the Neighborhood Leadership Academy. That turned out exceptionally well. Stacy Stout and Tom Almonte and others who worked on that put together a really good curriculum. We had the whole presentation today about the Neighborhood Summit. I mean, how much better could that get? We'll find out next year, right? We're doing a lot with our community's children, the LEAD program and the Mayor's 100, and it's kind of connected to our grow our own strategies. And what we're trying to do is intentionally connect these dots in a way where, for example, now we're using the LEAD program as a feeder for utility aid or public service aid or other jobs within the city. So it's working out pretty well.
And Eric, we're going to have, are we going to do the Leadership Academy twice a year?
I think it's at least twice a year. I can find out.
Yeah, I don't see Stacy. I just know the feedback on that was really positive, and I know that there are people eager to participate next time.
I'll find out for sure, but I know it's at least twice per year.
And I think what we're hearing too is that there is a need for education around planning and zoning.
Yeah, that needs to be added.
Right.
So a citizen planner kind of education, which we can
Yeah.
do. All right, so let's talk about another priority, business intelligence. So open data has been a priority of the City Commission for a long time. I want to thank Becky Jo, is she here? Yep, in the back. And her team for the work that they've done, and also Mayor Bliss for the work with Bloomberg to help us make really good progress with open data through the What Works Cities process. And what we're learning, what we've learned through our work with 311 is that open data is important, we'll make it available, and it'll be available for analysis and use, and we'll learn some things from people who look at our data. But we're also a learning organization, and we're capable of learning ourselves. And so the data that we have is really critical business intelligence. And we need to be very intentional about using that data to make our services better, to understand our customer better, to design better services and better responses. And we can do that. And so in this budget, we're shifting Becky Jo's responsibilities a little bit to include business intelligence. And she has staff that within her office that are functional and capable in that area. And we'll get started and see, we're starting out with some housing data and doing some pilot work there. And then we'll move on. I think parking is probably a very rich environment where we have lots of information. So, and then if we find that this is really productive and it's working well for us, we can increase resources as we go through Dew Point, our contractor, our IT contractor. So, so it's about open data for citizens to go in and use, but it's also about business intelligence for us to make our work better. And that'll be reflected in our technology statement that's in the budget as well. We have to disclose when we're using our data, and that's one of the things we're disclosing. Succession planning. So we've experienced a lot of retirements over the past 18 months. And as you can see here from this slide, we're going to experience a lot more. So 300 staff members is like 1 in 5 of our current staff. So think about that in 3 years. The people that you see here that support you, 1 in 5 of them may be retired. So, so that puts a real premium on growing our own in a very intentional way, and also data transfer. Part of that is data and knowledge transfer within the organization to make sure that we're getting people ready for the responsibility that's going to come to them like a freight train here pretty fast. So we want to get a lot better at that. So training is part of that that process. And that's what Frank talked to you a little bit about today. We've increased our tuition reimbursement. We want to do special training programs and development plans for people. We're doing a lot to bring people into the organization and make sure they stay here through a variety of ways. So growing our own, either growing our own by bringing in city residents to work here to increase our diversity, or by growing our own internally and have people stay and grow up in the organization is really important. And we've done that in a variety of ways.
Hey, Eric, can I ask a question about that? Can we get some more information on TRAT? I haven't requested any research in a very long time, so I'd like an update on that program, but then also if it now is primarily focused on providing internships, then should we just be working with Grand Valley, or should we really create a larger coalition with the other universities and colleges in the city?
Yep.
So those are 2 questions I have about that. So, Commissioner?
Eric, if you wouldn't mind going back a slide. And if this is in a future slide, just say it's in a future slide and we'll catch it later. But you have a bullet in here, I don't want to gloss over it, that in FY 2019, work will focus on improving and consolidating civil service exams. That's something that we've repeatedly heard as a barrier to helping grow our own and helping fulfill and especially diversify our workforce. I just would like to hear more on that, whether it's now or whether it's later.
Yeah.
Well,
And I think you'll hear from most of us that it needs to be sooner rather than later.
That's why I'm asking.
That's why it's here. So what I'm trying to, so if it's here, I mean to do it, so, so and I've talked to Mary Beth is on it. So then the idea is to collapse and consolidate, maybe even not have exams for certain positions. So trying to, and those are some of the recommendations that came from the work that we've done, so.
So my only reason for bringing it up right now is not to necessarily get an answer, but put a place marker that this is a priority that I know that I've heard around this table. And so, and I certainly don't want something half-baked, and I know you would never come to us with anything half-baked, but when you have something, as soon as you do, let's get that out so we could.
You want a meal in minutes though, right?
What's that?
You don't want a half-baked, but you'd like a meal in minutes.
That's
so.
true. Microwave it.
All right. So, thank you. All right, so succession planning, so we've done some really cool stuff in HR and administrative services, and Govern GR is one of those things that I think is serving us very well. So it's a place for persons who are new in the organization or are younger persons, and they've done it provides a learning environment, it provides kind of an affinity group. They talk to people who are more experienced in the organization about their experiences and how to grow and survive here in Grand Rapids. And so it's really been effective, and it's one of the things that I think will help us as we move forward. So we also have increased our tuition reimbursement this year, a small amount, and we can look at increasing it more as we go further. But and with the changes that we just made today, we'll be able to get more people in the program, and more people will be able to do tuition college study. So the succession planning, again, having to do with LEAD and the Mayor's 100 program. I really like the work that we've done to create this pipeline. So find young talent, get to know it, they get to know us, and then there are pathways into the organization. So that's something we'll continue to do and expand. All right, now I want to move into operational initiatives. And this is about parks. And so if you look here, you can see pre-millage. We were 20% reactive, which meant kind of break fix. If somebody called us, we went and fixed something. And we were only at 64% managed care. So with the approval of the millage and with the increase in the maintenance of effort expenditure, we've been able to kind of morph that into a point where we have very little need for reactive maintenance now, and we're really more into the managed care, which is a good improvement. But we haven't yet attained the goal that we'd like to get to, which came out of the master plan, which is to get to 60% comprehensive stewardship, which is a higher level of investment, and is something that we can talk about aspiring to in the future. So this budget includes the current state and maintaining this progress, but we have more work to do.
Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
Questions?
Just a comment that I'm glad we're heading toward managed care. I don't know if other commissioners are hearing this in their wards, but we're getting calls about dogs not being on leashes, and we need more signs, larger signs around that. We've had some dogs attacked and people hurt, and believe it or not, trucks being driven in parks. So we need signs.
What, trucks driven on the park?
Yeah, trucks.
Oh yeah,
in the
that's
park.
what you do in the third ward.
Yeah, there was trucks that was stuck in the park, right?
Yeah, they're still stuck
Still stuck.
as of yesterday. 3 trucks. Yeah, in the mud.
We should impound that truck.
All Perkins. Right beside it. We drove through it.
Why don't we tow them?
Can't get them out at this point. It was so wet. It's on the consumer's power, I think. But they drove through that part.
So, thank you for that.
I know what, Commissioner, I know what you're thinking.
Okay, thank you. I'm having a good time too. So, we've opened Indian Trails Park last June, Indian Trails Golf Course, and the golf course is great. We've had a fall and a winter to kind of grow in. Springtime has been a little difficult, I think, for growing, but this will be our second full year. We learned a lot last year, so we kind of overestimated rounds a little bit, or the value of rounds.
Go ahead.
So, and we got really good use of the driving range, but maybe not as much as we thought we would. So we've looked at the business plan as we put this budget together. We're in good shape, and we'll continue to learn about this new resource that we've created, and we'll continue to increase our work there. So, Commissioner.
Will this come back to us when David presents on parks?
I could, if
So we
you-
could ask, no, I just have a couple real general questions.
Okay.
And I could get answers later, I don't need answers now. Needless to say, I looked at this like second, because I want to throw stuff at Schaefer's face whenever I can. What's that? I'm gonna tell him I said it, because I plan on going to him. I really appreciated the narrative that I read on this, is that, because the first time you start something, you don't know what you don't know, right? So what I'm seeing here is under other services and charges, there's a $600,000 fee. I'm assuming that's a one-time fee, probably related to the parking lot or something to that effect.
That might have been the end of the
The end
construction
of the,
project.
yes, because other than that, it balances out. You know, if that's reduced, then the loss this year really wasn't that bad if we eliminate that one-time fee. But what I really appreciate is the learning of, we actually had more rounds than we thought, but they were less value on each
Right,
round.
they were
Because we had more people
walkers,
walking.
fewer carts.
Yeah,
Which
and
isn't
that's
a bad
great, they're
thing.
walking, so they're getting exercise.
Right.
So I appreciate the fact that we adjusted our budget that way, and then not only that, looked at greens fees, because I still think the greens fees there are a little bit too low, considering the value of the course and the style of the course, because I'm getting phenomenal feedback from my golfing friends, they love that course. So again, kudos to everybody, you know, so looking forward, it looks like, and this is more to my point, it looks like we're gonna be on budget to what we planned from a business plan as far as repayment and all that kind of stuff, so.
Yep, we're in good shape.
So,
Long as
make
we
sure
get
that
good
Mr.
play.
Schaefer knows that.
Yes.
Our next, Ollie.
Yes, thank you. June 1, right? So everybody should sign up, bring a team, bring lots of teams. So it was a good time last year.
It was.
And what I like too is so that raised around $20,000, and those dollars were used for kids' recreation. And so it was for an awesome cause, and we plowed it right back into programming for our kids. So,
Yeah.
so special events is a focus of our community. I think we have, I don't know how many events we have. I've actually lost track of trying to count them. What we're working on this year, we think the new system is working relatively well. We're going to do some focus group work, and we're going to look specifically also at small event fees to see if those fees are appropriate or not. So that's work that I want you to know is going to be happening this year.
So Commissioners, I know several of us have brought this up over this past year, and probably most of us have heard feedback from the community on this. You know, I think being really clear about our hopes for events, that we want public spaces activated, and we want to encourage and invite and nurture events in public spaces as much as possible. Obviously, there needs to be a balance, but my philosophy and what I told Eric, the ultimate goal shouldn't be about making money. It should be about activating public spaces and having a low barrier of entry for anyone who wants to use a public space, because public spaces belong to the public. And so again, I think as we've made changes to the events department multiple times over the years, I still personally don't feel like we have it just right. And I know many of us have heard from folks who have said they're either not doing an event, or they're moving it to Wyoming, or they're moving it somewhere else because of some of the struggles. And so we really want to get in front of that and try to really be a place where people feel like when they call us and they say they have an event, we say, awesome, we want you here, and we work with them to make it happen.
So, I think we have the right people, and like the mayor said, we've got a lot of it is better, but, we need to plan, do, check, act, and improve it. So that's what the focus group is for, and focus group work. And if you hear specific things, we want to know. So that's how we'll be able to make adjustments.
Yeah, if I could just add, because I do think we need to understand this better, because what I have been hearing is that we have moved to sort of a one-stop shop where people will meet with staff, and rather than going from department to department to department, it's all done at once. And so I think that's a huge step in the right direction.
Yep.
But again, this whole thing about fees and encouraging, I think we need to keep surveying people and finding out what more we can do.
Yep. And as Commissioner Kelly always says, we should see weddings in our parks every weekend in the summer. And we just don't see that yet.
It's too expensive.
That's
Yes,
part
so-
of what we're trying to get
Yes.
to address. So.
Absolutely.
All right. So another priority was forestry investment, and in the budget, we've got our phase 2 work in here. So phase 1, you've already budgeted for, and that will continue during this year. Phase 2 is about $400,000 a year, and that's the amount that we have in for the next 5 years for sure, and beyond that probably. So work we've already accomplished this year, you'll be very pleased to know that of the removals that we had to do, the emergency removals, we're at about 76% complete, which is phenomenal. We're at about 56% for pruning, and stump removals, we're lagging a little bit. We're at about 39% of the removal. So we've got trees we've removed, and there are stumps out there, but we're making progress. And the one really innovative thing that I'm really proud of staff for is that as they were working through this, they were able to get it done more effectively. And so they're using that money for tree planting to come behind the trees that they're removing and planting, and they're also using CDBG dollars for part of that. So I think that totals something like almost 1,560 trees of planting.
Yeah, and Mayor, if I can add,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that, well, there are about three things that really have impacted this. One is the canopy study, which DRI's funded, which we're very grateful for, and then the tree inventory, and then, of course, Mother Nature that sped this up. But will get us to a place now where we can be truly doing asset management in the future, so we're in good shape.
Yeah, thank you.
Eric, one quick question for you around the forestry piece. There seems to be confusion, I think, from time to time in the neighborhoods around who's doing what. I know there was an incident where, or quite often it's the Consumers Energy, I think it is, who is trimming trees and such. And then it's also us doing our part. I don't know if my other colleagues get calls or emails about that, about confusion, about who's doing what, and
Yes.
neighbors not being notified. And
Yes.
how can we do a better job of that? Because, I mean, it's, I don't know, how I respond is, of course, send it back to staff, but, I mean, when is it the city, and when is it the utility company?
Well, so I know that when I was paying a lot of attention to that, we had a protocol for how Consumers Energy and the city interfaced. And we can refresh that and see if that's still in place. But there were very definite requirements for what tree trimming for electric utilities could do, the process, how they were supposed to notify people, and all that was in place. So if we've deviated from that a little bit, then we ought to see if we have or not, because at one point it was pretty clear. And they trim for different reasons, so.
Right.
And so when we do tree trimming, we're either there to protect the tree or shape the tree or, get dead wood out so the rest of it can live and make them, they're there basically for clearance. And they're there for clearance and sometimes, and so we've been very specific in our regulations about what we think clearance means. So we don't want half a tree left and stuff like that.
I just think it'd be worthwhile to take a look at it again, because some folks are very, very sensitive about the trees in their neighborhood, and we hear about it, and again, we don't have an answer. I don't know if it's the utility or if it's us or what. If it's us, then we can obviously, get to a little bit quicker in terms of response, but I don't know. I just think it'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
to do that again.
I wonder if there's a way too to even electronically have like I went back and forth a little bit with city staff about even having information easily accessible on our website about the street construction we're doing this year, where people should be able to go in and really quickly be able to see what's being done this year versus in the future. And I wonder if we could have some kind of map. Clearly, our forestry department must have a map of what trees they're removing or
Good.
what neighborhoods they're gonna be in. It'd be nice if somebody could just pull it up. Because I know that folks try to get information before they reach out to us frantically. And I know some of us have gotten those frantic calls when someone finds out that the tree in front of their house is being removed.
Yeah.
Okay, so I made a note about the tree map, but we do have the street map out there.
Yeah.
So, of construction projects, so.
Yeah, yeah, and it's improved, because when I was out there a few weeks ago, I tried to find information and it was really difficult to find. So I know that they've made some changes,
Working
and
to make
thank
it
you,
better.
Becky. I'm looking at Becky Jo and Rick DeVries, I know who worked on that as well. So it's better, but those are the maps that we should have available pretty easily to the community.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can do that, what it would take. Okay, so there are two reorganizations. So actually, it's one with two pieces. So we've had a group known as Lighting, Signals, and Signs, and that has had traffic safety in it, so all the traffic signals, all the signs, and also street lighting, which at one time seemed like a really natural affinity and worked well. As we've dug deeper into the work of lighting in terms of rebuilding our infrastructure and doing the LED lights, we've determined that there may be a different and better affinity. And so, and also as we worked with Mobile GR in creating our Vital Streets plan and everything, it seems like it's time to evolve lighting, signals, and signs to have the pieces that need to be with Mobile GR go there, and have the pieces that need to be with somebody who is a utility, has a utility framework, go there. So in this budget, we've done that. And we started doing it already. And in this budget is the first budget that actually has them separate. So to Mobile GR goes the traffic safety function, the traffic signal function, signs, and kind of street layout, the design stuff goes over, the traffic part of street design goes over to Mobile GR and under Josh Naramore. And then the lighting side goes to ESD under the leadership of Mike Lund and Bruce Swears. And so we're already seeing good results. We're seeing uptake of the two new functions in these two departments, and it's going pretty well, and I think it has real promise for us. So it's continuing, and it'll be important on the ESD side as we talk about the capital investment required to reinvest in our street lighting system, to know that it's in the hands of a group that's used to doing big projects. So here's the lighting part. This is the part that went to Mike Lund, and we're making progress there already. So we've also done a lot of work on shared resources, and Tom Almonte has been leading this in the Public Services Group, and we've learned a lot through this process. And so you might remember the phase one of our work with EMA, where we were able to generate $25 million of operating savings in our two utilities, annual operating savings. And so that was important, and was worked really, and it's helped us stabilize rates and and really be very effective. So this next phase of work is about sharing resources among, rather than working within one department, sharing resources among many departments in a group. And so that's produced good results. We've already combined field operations for water and sewer maintenance. We've instituted key performance indicators across the group, which has worked well. We did the trash reduction program where we had part-time inspectors turn into full-time people that do TRP work in the summertime and then do snow plowing in the wintertime, which has been very effective. And so those are things we have done. Things we will do is the department is putting together an A3 about doing trench repairs. So right now we contract those out. We also, you might know, do a lot of temporary paving as part of the Vital Streets program, and they've developed quite a competency in street work. And so we think we might be able to do a better job, less costly than the private sector in doing trench repairs. So that's the premise of that, and we'll be talking about that maybe later in this budget process. And then the work that we talked about in terms of reorganizing lighting, signals, and signs also came out of this.
Eric,
Sure.
Back on that original slide, the shared resources model, I've been really fascinated to watch this with Tom. Kudos to Tom for his taking this on. I know it's not easy to get all those departments to work, play nice in the sandbox together and share their resources and all those kind of things. Is this something that we will be looking at in either this year and subsequent years at implementing this model with other departments?
I think so. So depending on how, and the early results are good. Mm-hmm. And this is a big group to do it in.
Yeah.
So it would be different, say, if we were in an administrative group. So if you look at Fiscal, for example, they do a lot of these kind of things already. So we're doing a lot of sharing of scanners, for example. So I think income tax bought a big scanner. One of our departments bought a big scanner, and so, but other departments are using it to get the most utility out of it. So we're trying to learn from this work and do it elsewhere. But yeah, it could be
Great.
expanded.
Thanks.
So we talked about staffing a little bit earlier today. There are 4 additional staff members in this budget, net of 4, that will take us up to 1,592 positions. So where are we with this introduction? So we've got a lot done. We're doing a good job of stewardship. We have good FY 2019 general fund budget. Our other departments are performing well, but we still need to continue to transform, because if we're going to compensate our people the way we ought to, if we're going to continue to be able to invest in new outcomes, we need to continue to make margin. And the best way to do that is through transformation. So, transformation really is about investing to reduce disparities. It's about investing to make margin. It's investing to change and evolve. So it's important to continue transformation as we go forward. So that is my introduction to you. And next we'll have Jeff come and talk a little bit about more directly financial items, and then we'll get into the transformation plans. Jeff.
So Eric, just process-wise, for the commission, if they have questions or would like more information, would you like us to email them to you?
Please.
Okay, so commissioners, as you're reading through, I know we just got our books this weekend. As you're reading through them, if you have specific questions, how about you email Eric and CC the rest of the commission so that we're aware what those questions are, and we can tee up those, and then some of us may have additional questions based on your question. So let's try to make sure that we get those to Eric as you read through them.
Thank you.
Hello, you ready? I'm going to go through
Take it away, Jeff.
pretty quickly, so if you have any questions, please stop me, but basically just a general overview of the general fund mainly, and then transformation and budget stabilization. So for those of you that may be new, I kind of like to do a fiscal plan layout, so you can see all these pieces that go into this book, and it's obviously a very large book, so I'm sure you've all read it all weekend because you have nothing better to do on the nice day. But again, it begins with the manager's letter, budget basics, the funds, and then the themes that we went with a few years back, grants, budget, authority budgets, appendices, and then some revenues, personnel, glossary, things like that. So that's how the book is laid out. Before we even begin the process, we have overarching guidelines that we have to use before we even start putting this thing together. So revenues plus fund balance by law have to equal or exceed expenditures. That's one of the primary things that we always look to. We try not to use any gimmicks or one-time funding to supplement our plan. We do it sometimes when we have to, but that's the thing we try to stay away from. We obviously try to balance the budget. This year we did increase the lapse. We always look at the lapse, what we put in the general fund. In the last 5 years, we've averaged $4.2 million, so we increased the lapse to $4 million this year. We expect to realize that. And you all know we do 5-year planning.
Jeff, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I know in the past we've worked with a group in the community through the brigade to do a website for folks about the budget, revenues and expenditures.
With OpenGov, you mean?
Yeah,
Yep.
through OpenGov. Have we shared all this information with them?
We are working on the export today and tomorrow. We'll get it to them hopefully by tomorrow or
Okay.
maybe later today. So, yeah.
Great.
Yep, we've been in contact with Alan Clark.
Oh,
through that,
good,
so,
good,
yeah.
good. Can you or Becky Jo, once they have that information and that site is up, can you make sure you share it with the full commission?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I just sometimes think we have so much coming at us, sometimes we miss that, so.
Yep, we'll make sure to send you the link. Obviously, we look at contingencies, and without contingencies, we don't have ability to manage our government, so we obviously use it to cash fund our financial transactions. We're self-insured, so we obviously need contingencies to pay for our health care and all those types of things. We use the dollars to advance fund grants, and we get grants, but we have to pay for it first and get funding, so we use our balances for that. We obviously use it for investment income and various other things. That's why contingencies are very important. You can see our targeted general fund unassigned fund balance is 15%, and we expect to end FY19 well above that at 21.9%. And then our budget stabilization expectation is 10%, and you can see we're expecting to end at 9.5%. And we're not doing it, or we didn't anticipate a transfer into there, and as the general fund expenses increase, obviously that balance continues to fall, so we need to make sure to monitor that over time to keep it back at that 10% level. In 18, we did transfer $600,000 in to bolster that balance a little bit. Our guidelines also call for a $1.5 million contingent appropriation, and that is built into each year of the 5-year plan. A few other guidelines that we go through, we talked about pension and retiree health. We fully fund the actuarially determined annual contribution amounts. Healthcare costs, 80-20 split with our employees. We fully fund our asset management plan, and this year I'm happy to report we're putting, I think, our financial asset classes, street lighting and forestry, providing funding for those. Those are two of the kind of ones we had not gotten to yet. And then we continue to maintain our maintenance of effort in the parks and vital streets. And you may or may not know, we're required to at least fund police with 32% of our general fund appropriations, and this year they're at 37.39, so we make sure we follow that every year. And then one of our big projections is income tax growth. We're expecting to end FY18 at 4.5%, but because of switch between capital and general, it shows 5% in general fund. In 19, we're projecting a 3% growth, and then 2.5% in the out 4 years. Here's our maintenance of effort for parks and vital streets. You can see we've grown from just over $5 million to just over $6 million for parks. And then our $13 million commitment to...
You went too fast. You got to go back one, sorry.
Sorry.
It's all right, I appreciate the speed. Projected income tax growth.
Yes, sir.
We've talked about this, at least I brought it up several times, is that our formula, if you want to call it, is
we actually had an intern do a whole projection thing based upon a lot of economic data. So we look at that, and then I actually rely on our income tax administrator, Jennifer Woodward, quite a bit for these projections.
Sure, but what I'm getting at is that we typically give up, through a brownfield tax increment finance, we give up property tax growth to gain development with the hope of gaining residents, which gains income tax.
Correct, that's true.
So if we're seeing a projected drop in revenue growth when we've seen more units come online, how does that jive?
Well, actually, we're seeing with the new tax laws that were passed, we're seeing a lot lower, about 22% lower in corporate income tax returns, actually, because they're taking advantage of some depreciation things. So we've 22 to 23% drop in corporate. So we built that into these estimates, and then personal is actually doing well. But then, so all of those things that you talked about are into this, as well as other things that happen outside of our control, like the Federal Tax Reform Act, unfortunately.
So I think it's really important to note that, because this has been an ongoing conversation that I've kept going, is that when we have this as our model, monitoring income tax and income tax growth is important, because we're giving up that property tax. Like we'll see later in this budget presentation, little to no growth, I'm guessing, in property tax. I haven't seen it, but that's typically been and that this is the reason why, and we need to talk about that. This is affecting our model. It's affecting what we're doing. It's kind of a big deal. I don't want to gloss over that, and it was outside our control.
Right. And most of the economic stuff I'm reading, people are expecting a downturn too in the next 2 to 3 years. So I'd hate to guess 4 or 5% each year and totally miss the mark too. So these, I think, are conservative, but hopefully attainable.
If my memory serves me correct, wasn't it last year we had to approve a temporary increase to our budget because we got unexpected growth in income tax, or the year before?
Expected a 6%, we got 6.68, I believe, is where we finished the year. So a little bit above, yeah.
I still want to gloss over that.
Sure.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point.
We talked about the parks MOE, the vital streets, the $13 million commitment. We had a higher amount in the first couple of years, $950,000, and we ramped that down to actually $850 a year now through the remaining 15 years, and that will get us exactly to our $13 million commitment on that. So we track that. Eric showed you this before, but this is a 5x5. I don't believe he has had the unassigned fund balance. You can see the losses in the out years, but because we've built that fund balance a little higher than our projection of 15%, you can see we're still projected to be at 13.7% in FY23. But obviously eating through our fund balance, and as Eric alluded to, we've got to fix that structural deficit.
Do we have these
the updated numbers? I know, Eric, you were mentioning earlier that with the court's numbers, these will change?
These will change by about $300,000 a year, and I hope to get the pension report, like I spoke to earlier, and that may also make a slight difference
Okay.
in this.
So at some point during this process, we'll get updated
Yeah, between the
numbers for
preliminary and
this.
final, we keep a list of all the changes that you guys may make or updated numbers, and then we'll put
Okay.
that out to you guys.
Sounds good, thanks.
So this is just some general information. We split our income taxes 3 ways, and you can see the general fund, about 83.7 million in 19. Capital Reserve Fund gets 4.5%, just under 4 million. And then Vital Streets is up around 13.5 million, and I believe when this started, it was around 9 million, so they've seen good growth for our Vital Streets program. And you can see general fund income taxes, where they were in 13, down around 62 million, so you can see in 19, we're expecting 83 million, so a significant increase from FY13, so very good growth. Property taxes, Commissioner Allen alluded to, we split those 5 different ways, and you can see the amounts of the various funds. General fund just under 14 million. Capital Reserve gets some, library, refuse, and parks for the parks millage. Here is another major revenue source from the general fund. We just talked about it, but you can see the growth. We're projecting 13.8 million in 19 and slowly growing from there. And these are based on estimates from our assessor. Revenue sharing, we love to talk about that. There's a 2-way split. We put half of the CVTRS revenues into capital and half into the general fund. And that the 5.2 million of CVTRS has not changed. I don't think in the last 4 or 5 years they've kept that stagnant. We have seen small growth in the constitutional piece going to the general fund. That's just over 18 million projected. Other revenue for general fund, you can see the various sources. Again, the biggest one is state revenue sharing. That's the state grants piece. Charges for services, that's a lot. Mostly our A87 allocation back to other departments across the city. Interest and rents, stuff like that.
Jeff, one more thing, and you don't need to go back to the slide, but I think it bears mentioning on revenue sharing. We had a joint meeting to talk about OPEB with police, fire, actuarial. You were there, and you made a really interesting point, is that the state would get revenue sharing back to where it should be, rightfully so. We basically almost eliminate our unfunded liability for OPEB altogether.
Yeah, I think we were around 26, 27 million at the peak.
So I think that's an important point. Again, another factor outside our control from the state level.
Yeah, and unfortunately at the state, they're talking about cutting it again. So,
This is a summary of the general fund expenses. You can see the majority, just over $93 million, goes for personnel, which is not only salary and wages, but healthcare, OPEB, pension, all the other additives that come with personnel costs. And then other services and charges is the next largest piece at just over 27 million. This is a breakout by department in the general fund. You can see it comes to the total of just under $143 million. Police 53.5 and fire is 31.2, our 2 largest departments. And fiscal services shows really large, but that's where we account for all the transfers out, things like that, to the court and parks. So that's not really just fiscal services. I gave myself a really big raise this year. Yeah. As we talked about transfers before, we have 5 transfers, and you can see the history of those. And again, the parks is just over 6 million. Dispatch is shown there. It dipped down, and now it's projected to go back up. But as you've learned, we're going to cut 300,000 from all these numbers going forward. Cemetery, we think we have stable at $350 a year, and then Vital Streets again is that $13 million commitment over the 15 years.
Cemetery papers probably could go back into the cemeteries.
I'm sorry?
yes,
Savings for cemeteries could probably go back into the cemeteries if they're.
yeah. That's on my list of things to talk about. I get more complaints.
Yeah.
So we issued those bonds, and I don't know if they've completed all the work on that, or are you talking maintenance itself?
General maintenance.
Okay. That was basically it on the general fund, unless there's any questions. Just have a few more slides on budget stabilization. You know, it takes a 2/3 appropriate or 2/3 vote for appropriation from this fund. It's obviously used as a savings account. It can protect critical services. We could go up to 20% by state law, and our policy is 10%. Obviously, to fund natural disasters, things that come up. And again, we're projecting that to be around 9.5% at the end of 19. And you can see it there, and you can see the percent goes down from 9.5 down to 8.6, and that's just due to the general growth in expenses in the general fund. So obviously, that will fluctuate as our budgets are approved. And
What was it for
expenses
18?
change a little bit. I'm sorry?
What was it for 18? What was our unassigned balance on that?
We moved it right back with its $600,000 appropriation. It was, I think it ended 9.9, somewhere in there. It's really close to 10. So. Transformation fund, this shows over time what we've invested in the transformation fund. There's a lot of categories. Police and fire were the two largest ones. And I don't know if you have any specific questions on those, but hopefully we all remember those investments well. And then in 19, we're actually projecting to spend the balance pretty much down for the $1.3 million transfer into the capital to support our capital plan this year. And then the $4.1 million is going over to our capital improvement fund for the river corridor activation. So we're projecting that to be a zero balance. And that was that's been reserved for river corridor activation for it's the land purchase and things like that, yeah. Yep. We just need to transfer it into the appropriate fund that we pay it out of. So. And that was it for my piece, unless anyone has any questions. Sure.
2018 OPS grant, since we didn't get that, there's $1 million set aside. What happens to that?
So that was to match the previous one, and that was in 18, so
Okay.
that's this current year, and then.
That was to match the previous,
Yes,
not
correct.
the application we made that
Correct.
we didn't get. I got you,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to-
And years 3 and 4, it's 75% and then 100%.
It's all lost, yeah.
So,
And those were moved actually back to the general fund in 19, because they're 100% ours now.
and we have an opportunity to apply for another COPS grant this year.
I believe so, yes. And I think we asked our lobbyist, a federal lobbyist, to check into why we didn't get it this year, so
Yeah.
he's going to do some work on it for that. Check into it. Any
All
other
right,
questions
Commissioners,
for
any
me?
questions about the app?
Thank you.
Good overview, Jeff, thank you.
Good start.
So next, we have Allison Sutter and Asante Kane to take us through Phase 4 of the transformation plan. So they'll describe the process, which we've talked a little bit about already today, and where we've been, and then also where are we going next, and when would we like some feedback. So with that, Allison, Asante, okay.
Hello, Commissioners and Mayor. So you guys were all elected, right, to serve this great city, and we all here also support that work. And as we do our work, you know, we're going. Our work is disrupted all the time. Whether it's an event, whether it's a circumstance, our work is disrupted. And so the way that we, our countermeasure for that disruption are these three plans: the sustainability plan, the transformation plan, and the fiscal plan. That's how we disrupt the disruption. And so when things come along, we either can mitigate that disruption, or we can avoid the disruption altogether. So disruption is achieved through the implementation of those three plans. So we have our phase 4 of the transformation plan. So, you know, we started way back in 2010, 2008 with the first transformation plan, and now we are here in on the cusp of 2019, the fiscal year 2019, for phase 4 of the transformation plan. We started this process in December 2017. We gave you an update on where we were with phase 3. We had 167 targets or value streams. Excuse me, I should say targets because, no, let me go back. We'll call those value streams. We had 167 value streams for the for the transformation plan. I'm reading that? Yeah, for the transformation plan. 36% were completed in December 2017, and 24% were being implemented. When we came back and reported back to you, must have been a month ago, we still had 167 of those targets. 54% were completed, and 7% we were still implementing. You guys had some follow-up that you wanted for some of those Phase 3 recommendations. We've asked staff to wait to give you that feedback once you look at the Phase 4, because many of those Phase 3 things we're continuing on into Phase 4. So in the language that we use, sometimes we said completed, and you said, hey, we think we should still be doing this work. That work many times is in Phase 4. So we want to give staff the chance to get your feedback on the Phase 4 before we get any feedback on Phase 3. Also in December 2017, ma'am?
Can I just ask you a question? Has there been any conversation about using a different word besides value streams, which really no one in the community understands what we're talking about? I mean, it's so technical and bureaucratic. Has there been conversation? Maybe I can look to Amy, who's our communications person. Like, can we look at some of the language that we use as we talk about the transformation plan? Something. It just has to be more easily digestible
Yes.
by people outside of this organization.
This is some of our best work and some of our most important work, so it should be accessible to the city.
Yeah.
So we can look at the language and
Yeah.
get something that's going to be more representative and more accessible to
I don't know if
citizens.
you all feel that way too. Like some of this, when I read some of this stuff, it's just
We want this plan to be yours, so yeah,
okay.
we can
So
look
then
at that.
I'll give that as a to do. Maybe we can think about some of the language and have it be more user friendly.
I think, Mayor, I'd also say too, when the sustainability committee is thinking about the sustainability plan, that might be a good time to have a conversation about how to structure both the plans and the language.
It's a good idea.
So just the genesis of the language is from lean. So.
It's from what?
Lean, which is where
I
all this
know.
came from.
I know.
So-
We know that, but the general public doesn't.
So we have to so while I want to fulfill this mission, I also want to have the organization understand it too. So we have to be able to translate both ways.
Yeah. Well, and we get that, but as we drive more and more to be customer driven, resident driven, we really have to look at that language.
Yes, so let's move on to setting the stage for Phase 4 and have Allison take it from there.
Thank you, Asante. I think you all hopefully got your printout as well, and then there's a bit of a memo that essentially is kind of an overview of the slides that we're going through today. So Asante, thank you. He's been my partner in crime with the transformation plan work that we've been doing, and have really appreciated working with him, as well as a lot of our other city staff. Just a couple other quick notes. I think you saw on the last slide, but we intentionally decided for Phase 4 to align with the timing of the sustainability plan. So the time frame for Phase 4 will be fiscal year 19 through fiscal year 21, so that it's ending at the same time that the current sustainability plan ends. So just wanted to kind of key that out. And I just realized he was reflecting for a minute on value streams versus targets, because I created this slide and I have my terminology backwards, so that was my fault. On the top it should say 167 value streams when we're talking about the transformation plan. But Mayor Bliss, I think to your point, right, most people understand these as goals, so we'll definitely take that feedback into account. Okay, so I'm just going to review a little bit of our process, where we are, and you have ultimately the draft Phase 4 in your hands that we are really asking for feedback from you to review and provide your feedback on what you think are appropriate value streams to be in Phase 4, ensuring that they reflect the priorities that you identified in December and that those have been incorporated, as well as any kind of high overarching ideas or thoughts that you have that you would like to share with us for purposes of Phase 4. But really the intent around Phase 4 was to incorporate the priorities that you identified in December. But this time we were also very intentional about doing our best to authentically engage staff in the process. And it's been acknowledged with the staff that we were on a very condensed timeline. And so the staff that are here, I just wanted to thank them and say that I know that we asked them to provide responses and feedback in a very short time frame. Very much appreciate the staff really stepping up to the plate and providing some input for us, because I think that that's an extremely important component to the creation of the plan. And then the third part is really then we had what I loosely refer to as a core transformation plan team that we came together to really synthesize all of the recommendations from city staff and try to look at it from that higher arching strategic perspective to make a plan that's a little more concise and manageable, and try to work through duplications that may have submitted across different pillars or across different departments, and really make sure everything's lined up and hopefully speaking to all of the priorities that you identified and that Eric already went through in his presentation today, and that's been included. So with that, I think I already mentioned, but previously we reviewed in March when we went through phase 3, but we did really try to be laser focused on having value streams that address your priorities or are transformative. And the way that we identified those are by looking at things that are a significant change from past process, save a large amount of resources, helps embed diversity, inclusion, and equity into our work, or is looking at balancing distribution by ward. And we also asked staff to think about projects that are very cross-departmental and complex, and for those to be included in here. And so that was really what was leading for everyone to be thinking about and top of mind when we were trying to identify the best value streams that should be included in phase 4. So this is actually, I think, our last slide, just to provide you a little bit of high level as to where things currently stand. So as mentioned, you are already aware that we evaluated phase 3 and looked at kind of the completed versus the not completed, and also looked at staff's recommendations for any value streams that should be rolled over from phase 3 into phase 4. And we received some good feedback from some of you as well, so I really appreciate your feedback on that. When you look at the items from phase 3 as well as new value streams that were recommended to be included, we ended up with 202 to start in the very beginning. And so really trying to work to streamline, knowing that a lot of the comments in the past have been that we need to make this a tighter, more concise plan to operate under. And so it's currently at 111 value streams, which is about a 45% reduction that we've tried to work through, being very mindful of the guidelines that we tried to establish and being very strategic in nature. And so some of the graphs that I put up on here, I do also want to note that one of the methods that we applied to creating phase 4 and streamlining phase 4 was we have a new value stream, and I believe Eric's mentioned it before, that directs all departments and service teams to create their own strategic plan that includes more of those operational tasks and day-to-day tasks that are very important work, but don't necessarily meet the definition of transformational in the way that we've been defining it. And so ensuring that there's a place for those to stay and for departments to be tracking progress and reporting out on that, but that it's not something meant for the transformation plan. So pretty much almost any of the value streams that were eliminated from staff recommendations, we're saying those should be items that you should put in your own department strategic plans moving forward. And so that's really an important component now, where we'll have kind of the overarching sustainability plan with the transformation plan that aligns to it. And now we'll kind of have these more department-specific strategic plans. And I know the fire department and others have done really nice presentations to you on some of the types of strategic plans that can be done. I don't know that they'll all be quite as extensive because they have some additional resources available to them. But we are asking everyone by the end of fiscal year 19 to craft an initial strategic plan. Okay, so just wanted to then go through the data, and if you have any questions, you can let me know. I provided a couple graphs on the screen, but they're also on the back page of your memo, just to help you understand a little bit more the context of ultimately what is in phase 4. So the first graph on the top left shows in blue, those are the number of value streams by pillar that were in phase 3. Gray is what was ultimately recommended, and then yellow is where we've landed at this current time with 111, and you can see how that shakes out across the different pillars. On the top right, that just provides you a sense of, for each pillar, those value streams that came over from phase 3 versus new recommendations. Get a sense of that. The pie chart breaks down the value streams by pillar. So governance having the most, around 36%, social with 32%, environment, and then economic. And the last chart on the bottom right is then just showing kind of that same type of information, but as a percent of the total value stream. So for phase 3, 10% of all the value streams fell in the economic pillar. So there's a little bit of uptick there, and that was really in response to the results from your priority work session. If you go back and look at those, the number 1 pillar group that you identified was the social pillar. So that got increased a little bit. The number 2 and 3 were fairly close. That was economic and governance, with the fourth being environment. So we were trying to be mindful of that to make sure that we have value streams and that the portion of value streams in the pillars are working to more closely align with your priorities. So the last part is really just, we've provided this to you in written form, or the printed form. I'll be happy to send it to you via email so that you can have an electronic copy of it as well. If you flip through your book, a couple things to note. It is not an error that perhaps the page is not fully filled out. In a couple of areas, we were just intentional about breaking the page because there was a clear definition for maybe the department's work for having it all aligned on a page. So didn't want you to think that there was anything missing with that. But the goal is now to solicit your feedback, give you some time to digest this and ask questions. We currently are scheduled to come back on May 22nd, although I told Eric, I don't know. Maybe don't count on me for anything after May 18th, I'm not sure, but I'm hoping to still be here on May 22nd, and that we'll have an opportunity during the budget review meeting that day to take questions from you. You're happy to, if you have some ahead of time that you'd like to email and ask, but would love to request any feedback that you have on the plan. You can send it to us either in email, or if you want to wait until we have that presentation that day to give it to us verbally. But we're hoping by the end of the 22nd that we'll have received your feedback so that we can then incorporate that and finalize it so that the final approved transformation plan phase 4 will be included in the final fiscal plan that will be printed later in the year. Currently, I just also want to note in your budget book, there's not a tab yet for the transformation plan because it was still in draft form, but the intention is that the approved transformation plan phase 4 will have a tab in the final fiscal plan that will be printed later this year. Do you have any questions?
Allison, I have some questions. So first one, if we have feedback on this, just send you our feedback.
I think to Asante and myself, yep.
Okay, okay. And then for some of these, and granted, it's not relevant for some that are new, but for some of them where we want to increase something, or do we have baseline data to show where we are today so that we can track really good metrics?
So in a number of areas, we worked to ask staff and for ourselves to be as quantitative as possible with respect to creating a value stream goal to track. If there's one that you have a particular question about, if it's not reflected in here, where perhaps it doesn't state what the baseline is and you would like to know what that actually is, I'm happy to help facilitate getting that if it exists. Some of them actually will say establish a baseline because one doesn't currently exist.
Right. I would say by any of them where it says increase by 5%, increase by 20%, increase, for example, recycling customers to 60,000, like, it'd be really nice for us to know where are we today in relation to what the goal is. And then again, a secondary question to that is, how do we turn this into a dashboard that people can easily see where we are today, what our goal is, and progress that we're making, and are we going to do that on a quarterly basis or every 6 months? I think it'd be helpful for us, but also in the community. And, I think I put this on the feedback I gave you last time as well. For some of the goals, it would be nice to know if it's tied to like a best practice. Where did that goal come from? Some of that would be, and maybe that will be incorporated into the budget process in general as some of this is talked about in more depth. And not that it has to be a part of this document, but it would be nice to know where some of these came
Yes.
from.
And some of them, there is a column that says origin. So some of them are a little clearer than others. It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily state, I think, where you're going in terms of is there a best practice and has it been identified from a peer city or from a third-party review document. Some of them have identified if it's come from past plans, the GR Forward plan, for instance, or something, we've tried to flag and ask staff to help provide some information there. But I hear your feedback there and we'll make sure that we take that down. I guess one question to think about, whether you have a response now or later, would be how often would you like to have reports on this? And hopefully you don't say monthly.
No. I mean, we talked about this a couple of years ago at a fiscal update, and I think we requested every 6 months, if I remember.
I feel like 6 months is a good
Yeah.
time frame where you can see that whether enough work has been done, enough time has passed to report out on some advances that have been made. I think quarterly it might be a little too short of a turnaround time frame. So,
Yeah,
okay.
I think 6 months would be good. And then some of them, it just would be nice to have a little more clarity on what it means. So even I'm looking at page 6, like create quality of life policy amendments and amenities based on best practice. Like what are we actually trying to accomplish with that? Is it talent attraction? Is it work-life balance? I mean, it'd be, for some of these, it'd be nice to know, like, what is our ultimate goal?
Okay.
That we're trying to achieve by doing that. But again, commissioners, I'm sure all of us have questions about some of these, so please read through them. Get feedback to Allison and Asante so that then we can take another fresh look at it on May 22nd and hopefully finalize it, and then talk about how do we report out, dashboard, and then also regular updates to this body and to the community.
Okay, appreciate it. The dashboard part is something that I think is going to be a great opportunity for us to consolidate and report out on, and I'm looking forward to our Sustainability Advisory Committee's feedback on that as well, and helping to maybe highlight some of that and what opportunities we may want to pursue. Thank you, and like you said, we'll be ready if you have any questions for us.
Great, thank you.
So the last piece that I'd like to cover today has to do with the racial equity lens budget tool. And so if you have your budget with you and you wanted to look at attachment E, you could see the projects listed in there. And the tool was devised using the open data system that we have through Becky Jo was helpful with that. Patty Caudle helped design that. And then we set up a series of coaching sessions with departments. So this is a brand new thing. What does it mean? How do you use it? What are we looking for? What questions do you have? And then Patty and Becky Jo and AJ and others also did, and Mary Beth also did coaching after like the first project was submitted. So people had a chance to get coaching comments about how to improve their work, how to get closer to the product that we were looking for. So in the end, people had a lot of face time, a lot of contact, learned a lot through the process. We learned a lot about the tool and how to make it better in the future. And but most of all, we got some really good feedback. And so when you look through these, you'll see that they're some of them can be kind of categorized into certain focus areas. So several of them are wondering about, well, I need to establish baseline data. So there are 3 or 4 that are saying, I want to do some work to establish that data. There are 4 or so that are focused on employment practices or increasing employment. 2 of them are about translation of product to reach more people, language translation basically. There are some on communication and engagement. And then one that I'm really kind of personally excited about is it came in for motor equipment system about using the P card for being more intentional about the spend. So when they buy supplies and buy things, with our P card we have a choice where we shop. If we are using off the bid list, then we have, we're, in the case of motor equipment, you're buying from AutoZone or somebody else. So, and AutoZone's a great company. Love their pricing and everything they do for us, for example. But there are opportunities using the P card to be more intentional about using small local businesses as well. And so, and there were 3 or 4 variations of that I heard during budget review. So what I intend to do with, and basically what I told everyone is, awesome idea, gave a few of them some more coaching comments and said, go do it, get it done. And so I expect to see 36 different experiments out of this that will set the stage for next year. And when you review your transformation plan phase 4, you'll see that we're wanting to increase use of this tool in future years because we think it has some pretty good promise. So that's the kind of work that we'll be doing with this over the year, and I'm very interested in your feedback.
Question, so which came first, the initiative or the toolkit? So did you use a toolkit in a department to determine what the initiative should be?
We taught them
Or you thought
about,
go ahead.
well, so kind of the process that we went through the REH process, and everybody did the, all top management went through the training here. And then also out of the learning that we had done through GARE and others, there's this racial equity toolkit that they have. And so, so there was learning about the toolkit, and then we implemented we basically put the toolkit in a questionnaire format and had people work through that, looking at, so they looked at neighborhood impact, demographics, all kinds of data through the process of doing
Of their work, of their departmental work.
their departmental
I
work.
see.
So I
Okay.
didn't, and no one told them what to look at. I just said, you need to find something that's of value to look at and
Okay.
do that. And so they self-selected.
So then, and I see Patty kind of coming up behind you too, if you wanted to chime in, Patty, but did you, I know at some point we talked about the departments who were doing assessments. So was that the assessment, or, so now we have every department has done an assessment?
Well, we have, every department has used the tool.
Okay.
And so now in the transformation plan, we want to get into assessing policies.
Okay.
So that's the next step. And one of the things that City Attorney Hitchcock would like to do, she's has a line on some really high-quality legal interns, and she wants to bring them in. That's one of her value streams, bring them in to start looking at our policies and practices to see which of them may or may not have unintended racial impacts.
So, and I know, Eric, you're kind of coming in at the end of Greg kind of being a part of this group, so I may not be saying the right word, so Mayor and Patty jump in, because I think you guys probably know where I'm going with this, but we had talked about each department doing an equity assessment of their units. So I'm curious to know where we are with that, because this doesn't sound like this is it.
No, this was not.
Yeah, and I know that a couple had opted in, and we were saying, no, it makes sense for every department to do it.
Yeah, this piece that Eric's referred to is much more specific to the tool, the racial equity tool and toolkit,
right.
which GARE didn't make up. I mean, they honed it, but it's been utilized in other cities and is based off a lot of the work that's been done over the last 15 years in Seattle.
Okay.
So it was a template that was already well researched for embedding a racial equity lens, especially into budgeting and budgeting
okay.
decisions. And
Okay.
so Patty, if you want to talk a little bit more about the larger assessment.
It reminds me of what I already did. So in the requirement to do a strategic plan for each department, we're going to include that as an element.
Okay,
So
thank you. I knew I wasn't saying the right thing. I knew you would know, but I didn't know how to get you to know.
pick Patty to translate for us.
Because I knew you were just kind of coming in on the back end.
I speak Commissioner.
She does. Thank
And
you.
that is really the intent, whether it's using the tool for the budget or even for strategic planning, is that it would really be embedded as a
Embedded,
part of it
right.
and not a separate checklist.
Right?
And you'll
Absolutely.
notice that the budget tool was used not just for the budget tool, but a lot of departments use the budget tool as part of their transformation. So, for example, Anita Hitchcock identified interns, and not only in her budget tool, but in her transformation plan.
Okay.
So you'll see
So we'll
it
see that in
crossed-
there as well.
Yes, you'll see it,
Okay.
you'll see it crossed into a lot of different areas, and that was the goal and what we really wanted to happen with this tool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So that kind of helps me to know what I'm looking at when I'm reading this.
And commissioners, you'll remember from our conversations at the end of year during our annual evaluations for appointed officials that we had conversations about this with our treasurer's office and clerk and attorney. Yeah, Commissioner?
So do you want us to give you some written response to this related to the items of concern? How,
You can come see me, so either way you'd like to do it.
okay. Just one comment that just jumps off the page at me. If I heard you correctly, as I was reading and listening and at the same time, which I do all the time, you were saying that a lot of the departments self-selected.
Yes, they did.
So there's some of these that I have concerns about. And this is one that I've actually mentioned before. So under lighting and signals and services, it's use racial equity toolkit to create an equitable method of lighting replacement. What does that mean? That means, so I mean, they self-selected it, but like, I called them out on that last time they brought this forward. I'm like, what does that mean? How do you measure that? How do you know you did that? So for what it's worth. And then
Yep.
here's an example of a really good one. So I'm not picking on anybody or picking out anybody, but under engineering, which I didn't expect to see one, I see a really good one. It's utilize the racial equity toolkit to evaluate the requirements of the pre-qualification process. They've identified that that's probably a barrier, and that's their description of the project is to dig in and determine that. And then in some of these, and I'm going to pick on Patty because she's standing there. Sorry.
I cheated.
This was before you stood up. So your department has created an internal team to review guidelines for purchases less than 10,000 to ensure opportunities for small, local, minority, and women-owned businesses. I mean, I kind of understand that, but really that should be in purchasing, which is something we're working on in purchasing significantly. And in theirs, they have increased the number of micro LBE vendors registered with the city. And I would contend that, and I've talked with Amy and Jeff about this a lot, increasing the number of micro LBE vendors registering with the city does nothing, because the city process itself, going back to my using the method of engineering about how you get registered, the issue is not getting registered, is the system we're using creating an equitable outcome, and I contend it's not. And that's not the city's fault, that's the tool they're using. We need to change the tool. Similar to the context of looking at the civil service, is that an unnecessary barrier? I mean, I think there's a ton more opportunity for small business, local business, minority business, women-owned businesses to do business with the city, but we through unintended decisions, unintended consequences, we've created these barriers. And so what I really want to, and I'll write this up more in a robust fashion, but I just really think we need to really, in some of these cases, drill down a lot deeper and look at it a lot closer.
So that's a great point. So when you said that, so we had the request for motor equipment, or the recommendation for motor equipment about how they wanted to use the P card. You had purchasing talking about what they talked about. You had the other department talked about what they all involve purchasing and the acquisition of goods and services. And so the idea that I had was, that's good that they're all thinking about that. They're kind of in different parts of the elephant. Let's put them in the same room and figure out, okay, I think using the P card is just a super idea. So how do we make that work? And what do people need to do that? And so that will get to the under 10 real easy. And is a way to, I think, distribute our spend more equitably across the community. So it's about finding the affinities, because they've kind of self-identified what they're interested in. And so I know that those three departments at least have an interest in doing that. So I'm going to put them to work doing that, because I think they'll get it done.
I'll type up something more significant.
What we told the departments when we were doing the training is, if you're interested in doing something, go ahead and go do that. But go for, this is a pilot program.
find something you think you can accomplish in this fiscal year, so that we can test it, see how it works, and then go back and make changes that we need to make changes to. So understand that this is a pilot, and what you're looking for on this table is a very small portion of what was submitted by the departments. So you're looking, yes, you're looking at a very small snapshot of what was a probably 25-page submittal by each department.
Yeah, and I'll finish my comments with this, is that I think this is a great first step, and you
Yes.
use that comment. So to get people
I-
off the
I
dock,
appreciate that.
so then once you're off the dock, you can navigate the boat.
Exactly.
If we're truly serious about this, I'll just say it. If we're truly serious about this, we almost wouldn't need an equity and diversity inclusion department, because it would be embedded in everything we do.
I agree.
And so,
I agree.
We're not quite there yet. So.
not that I want to get rid of you or anything, I'm just saying that that's truly, I mean, and I say that about my day job, is that if I'm in business to deal with a negative consequence or a negative social issue, my work should be to work myself out of a job.
Well said. One final question about this, and I agree, it's a really good start, and we have a lot to learn. But when I look at this list, who is the team or the individual that's going to help the departments walk through this if they run into struggles, or like even I'm looking at the street sweeping. So if you really, to me, that how we currently do street sweeping will look different based on the needs, if it's gonna be truly,
Yep.
if we're gonna meet the needs of the different neighborhoods in our city. So help me understand who's gonna really walk through this and even assess whether this goes far enough to meet our goals.
Well, so it is a pilot, and so I don't expect to solve all of our problems with these 36 issues. What I do expect is to see progress. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that we have this group of partners, the REH partners, who've traveled the GARE circuit and the REH circuit and have done really good work together. And they've been good coaches and advisors for the team so far. So I want to kind of keep that group together and have them provide advice as we move forward. And then just like we're reporting on the transformation work on a semi-annual basis, I think we can report on this as well. So I want, I want to have, we did this work for the right reasons to make progress, and I want to be able to report on the progress, or lack thereof, so.
Okay, great, thanks. Commissioners, any other questions? We're a little bit over.
Okay, I'll just remind you of the schedule. You've got it in your packet. And I want to thank you for your attention today for the first of our budget reviews. And I will, our next one is on May 8th. We'll tell you in advance what part of the budget book we're looking at. If you can give me questions in advance, if you have questions in advance, if you're reading ahead, let me know. And we'll try to get those queued up for the appropriate day. All right? So, and I want to thank the staff that remains, stuck with us here. Wouldn't be here presenting this without them, and I'll do a more thorough thank you in a more appropriate way some other time. But I just want to let them know that I appreciate them and that they've done great work to get us here. So, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Eric. All right, commissioners, so we will be back in here tonight at 6:30 to swear Joel in. There will be a little bit of a break after the swearing in before we start our meeting at 7. All right?